Mom, I signed the papers. It's done. You're moving into Maple Ridge on Monday. They have a room ready. It's for your own good. That's how my son told me he'd sold my house. He was sitting 2 feet away at my old oak kitchen table in Evanston, Illinois, tapping a pen against a folder labeled in his neat, confident handwriting, Evelyn, Healthcare and Finances. I had poured him coffee like I always did when he stopped by, mug warm in my palm, the smell of roasted beans leaning over memories of Saturday mornings with my husband reading the Tribune. And he told me he'd signed things on my behalf. He had that professional tone he uses for his investment clients, the one that turns bad news into a favor. It's a continuing care place, Mom, he said. Safe, clean, close to the lake. Private room. You'll have people around. You won't keep falling for those sweepstakes calls. You can make friends. I have friends, I said. And I set his coffee down like it was fragile crystal. I taught 3 generations in this town. I know every grocer and librarian from here to Rogers Park. And I didn't fall for any sweepstakes calls. I bought stamps. He smiled the way people smile at toddlers who say things that aren't true. Mark, my only child, my boy who once cried because the cub he idolized got traded, had learned to smile at me like that. It took my breath away. I talked to Grace, he said. She agrees this is best. You shouldn't be alone since last winter. The house is a lot. Your father died in January, I said, and my voice behaved itself. It's May. I've been alone for 4 months and 7 days. I can handle a dishwasher and a front door. He patted my hand. It's not about doors. It's about planning. You taught me that. I didn't say it out loud, but the person who taught him to plan was his father. Walter Carter didn't move a salt shaker without an endgame. When we were 22 and poor and stupidly in love, he wrote our budget on the backs of diner napkins. When we were 60 and not poor and still stupidly in love, he wrote our future on legal paper I wasn't allowed to see until he said I was ready. Mark pushed the folder toward me. It contained copies of things he said were for my peace of mind, a durable power of attorney, to help with bills, a medical directive so decisions aren't stressful, and a listing agreement for the house. A few pages had sticky flags. The flags were cheerful, lime green, sunny yellow. They meant I had already signed, back when he brought the forms under the disguise of grief and casseroles. I remembered my pen that day, the way it stuttered in winter light. He'd told me they were for insurance and funeral things. He'd set where I should sign in helpful neon. I'm not incompetent, I said, my voice steady but my fingers treacherous. They trembled. I tucked them under the table gently as if they were small birds I needed to warm. I'm not sick. I know, he said quickly. You're spry as anything and you'll charm the nurses. Mom, look at me. He leaned forward. I love you. I'm doing this because I love you. The boy I raised always used love as a hinge when he needed a door to swing. I lifted my coffee to my lips and tasted nothing. Outside, the L rattled in its familiar rhythm. Inside, my son told me he'd taken care of everything. The house would close fast, cash buyer, a group that does flips, Mom. They'll make it cute and sell to a young family. My belongings would be whittled down and the rest handled, the moving truck already scheduled. Monday, he said again, softer, like he was comforting me. I'll drive you after check-in. There's a lake view from your window. I nodded as if I were grateful, and he was right. He stood to leave. I hugged him at the door. He smelled faintly of cologne and the inside of leather car seats. He kissed my forehead, exactly like his father used to do every morning before work. The softness of it almost made me forget what he'd done. Almost. When the door closed and his shoes no longer tapped on my front steps, the house felt like it shifted under me, like an old ship unmoored. I walked into the living room and touched the mantel, then the framed photograph of Walter at Wrigley with his cap crooked and his smile arrogant because the Cubs were winning that day in late summer. I stood on the braided rug we'd bought when Mark was in Little League and learned how to bunt. I looked at the walls that held 46 years of our marriage, and I did not cry. I went into the bedroom, pulled out the dresser drawer, and lifted a bundle of scarves. Underneath waited an envelope, the color of wheat, the flap sealed with a dot of wax like old-fashioned letters in movies. On the front, in my husband's careful, spare script, it said, Evie, open when you feel strong enough. I had not felt strong enough in January or February, or the day when Mark arrived with daisies and a stack of papers, but as I slid my thumb under the wax, I realized that grief had given me a spine I didn't know I owned. Inside were 3 things: a letter, a brass key, and a business card so old the edges curled. The card belonged to a man named Arthur Lawrence, ESQ, and the address was in a building downtown on LaSalle that I knew by the way it turned gold in autumn light. The key was stamped with the logo of a bank I had never used. The letter smelled vaguely like the cedar box where Walter kept his cufflinks. My love, if you're reading this, it means I managed to keep my promise and you managed to keep breathing. Both took work. I'm sorry for the secrets, but secrets are just safety with a bow on them, and I needed you safe from worrying while I was alive. Do you remember the small chain of senior homes on the west side you used to visit when your 3rd graders collected mittens? We would spend Saturdays dropping off cookies, and you'd scold me for bringing a camera because you wanted no one to feel like a prop. You always saw dignity first. I learned from that. 15 years ago, I invested in one of those homes, then another. The economy broke its ankle, and men who wore suits fumbled their dignity. So I bought their pieces when they fell. I bought carefully. I built quietly. I put it all under a trust named after your middle name because I liked the way it sounds and because I knew you wouldn't look closely at a thing that looked like you. I did it because the people inside those buildings are all versions of you and me with different postcards stuck on the refrigerator. I did it because if anyone should define what dignity looks like at the end, it's you. If I died first, Arthur would be the man to call. You always liked him because he never kissed rings and never used words like leverage unless he was moving furniture. The key will open box 214 at Midwestern Trust and Savings on LaSalle. Inside are the papers you'll need. The trust has a clause that will make you mad at me. I ask your forgiveness in advance. It requires you to pretend for a while. Sometimes pretending is protection. You'll understand why when Arthur explains. As for Mark, he is good right down to the bone he hides behind ambition. He will not know how to be a man without money's approval until someone shows him how. You, my fierce Evie, are the only person who can teach him that. I am giving you a hammer and a violin. Hit the right notes. Break what you need to. I trust your hands. Well, I read it twice, then once more when my heart stopped skipping. I held the brass key like it had its own temperature. Pretend for a while, he wrote. The sting of the clause was there on the page without words. I knew my husband. I could read the roots of his mind like streets I'd lived on for decades. He wanted me to act weak. He wanted me to let people show me who they were. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and drank it at the kitchen table, where my son had smiled like a banker. The clock above the stove ticked its honest seconds, not aware that time had changed shape. Then I took a shower, put on my spring jacket, tucked the letter and the key in my purse, and walked to the bus stop as if I were another widow out on an errand. The gold building on LaSalle had the same old belly of the city smell, marble washed in a century of footsteps. Arthur Lawrence's office was up 3 flights in a suite with windows that let in the kind of light that makes dust look like confetti. He rose when I walked in, and I realized Walter had been wrong in one detail. I did not like Arthur because he spoke plainly. I liked him because he never tried to make me small. He had one of those faces that look like trust itself. Angles softened by time, a mouth that knew how to grin without the grin becoming a trick. Evelyn, he said and squeezed my hands in his. I've been waiting. You took longer than I thought, but then you always take the time it takes. My husband left me homework, I said, and handed him the letter. He said you'd be the man to explain. He read it the way a careful man reads, a quiet moving of the eyes, a pause at the line about the claws, a softening at the hammer and the violin. When he was done, he nodded. He wasn't wrong. Are you ready to be mad at him and still love him? The next few weeks require both. I've practiced, I said. He's been dead for 4 months and 7 days. I've had to learn how to be 2 things at once. Arthur smiled just enough to respect the joke. Then let's go get your box. At the bank, the clerk asked for ID and the key, and then for my signature in a ledger that must have remembered the hands of hundreds of the once living. In a room the size of a pantry, Arthur set the metal box on a table and slid it open. Papers weighed more than their pages. Share certificates, board minutes with my husband's name typed beneath chair, lists of properties, lists of subsidiary LLCs with names like Broadway House and Willow Terrace, a web that settled around one phrase embossed on the thick folder at the bottom, Silver Haven Trust. That's the umbrella, Arthur said. He put it all there. 34 facilities across the state, a management company, a service company, the buildings themselves in separate holdings. He named you successor trustee and beneficiary. There's a board, but the trust controls the board. He wrote guardrails because he knew grief makes for bad driving. This is too much, I whispered. He did this while we were eating soup and watching Jeopardy. He did it because you were eating soup and watching Jeopardy, Arthur said, and his voice was gentle. He believed that doing it quietly was the best protection. Listen to this. He laid a single document in front of me. It was labeled in Walter's hand. For when Evie is tired of pretending. I read the clause that made me mad at him. It said I should not assert control for at least 30 days after his death unless my safety was compromised. It said that if my safety was compromised, Arthur had authority to act. It said I should live like any other resident in one of the buildings for a period of time not exceeding 90 days before changing anything, so that she may see with her own eyes the real thing under the brochure. He wanted me to move into one of them, I said, not a question. He wanted me to be a resident. For a while, Arthur said, he wanted you to meet people, to see where there is dignity and where there isn't, then his words, not mine. Do what you do, Evie. Fix it, in your way. The anger rose, hot and brief, the way steam rises from a kettle before the whistle. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Arthur said, we make sure no one hurts you. The trust holds your home in a separate shell he set up last year. Mark cannot sell what he does not own. He brought me papers with flags, I said. I signed some of them. I don't remember all the details. He told me it was for funeral things. Arthur exhaled through his nose as if calming a horse. He got you to sign a general power. It doesn't supersede the trust. It gives him access to small accounts. Not the house, not the trust assets, but it's enough to cause mischief. We'll freeze what needs freezing, and we won't tell him why. Walter wasn't naive about your son. He wrote contingency upon contingency. He knew the difference between a boy who is kind and a man who is careless with other people's roofs. I sat very still and listened to the clock on the wall tick its bureaucracy. He wants me to pretend, I said again, but the anger cooled into something else. Curiosity, maybe. A sense of mission. How long do I have to stay in a place like that before I can fix it? Long enough to see, Arthur said. Short enough that you don't smack anyone with a cafeteria tray. He guessed you'd last 6 weeks. I'll last longer, I said, and felt the old teacher in me lift her chin. Arthur laughed, and it sounded like relief. I'll make the arrangements. Maple Ridge is in Evanston, close to your church and the lake, and, purely coincidentally, part of the network. Their administrator answers to a regional who answers to the management company that answers to a board that answers to you. For now, we keep that line covered. You'll go in like anyone else. You'll act like anyone else. You'll watch. You'll keep a notebook because I know you. And when you're ready, you'll take what's yours. Mark thinks he sold my house. Arthur's mouth became a line. He'll find out he did not. I'll handle that piece. Let him think what he needs to think. He'll show us who he is. When I left the bank and turned my face toward the lake, Chicago's wind pushed against me with the stubborn kindness of an old friend. I went home and packed 2 suitcases like a woman going on an odd little vacation, labeling them with large index cards because I planned to play my part. I packed my comfortable shoes and 3 of Walter's sweaters because sometimes grief needs wool. I left the letter in the cedar box under my scarves. I put the key to the deposit box in the pocket of my spring jacket and slipped Arthur's card into my purse. On Monday, my son came as promised, all bright assurances and gentle orders. He carried 1 suitcase to his SUV and made a show of struggling with the other. I pretended not to notice the way he looked around the living room as if appraising the rug and the heirloom clock. I asked him to take one last picture of me on our front steps. He did, and I smiled like a woman going off to college. I touched the brick, whispered, "See you soon," and climbed into his car without complaint. Maple Ridge looked like a hotel in need of a remodel. The lobby smelled of lemon cleaner and something simmering in a crock pot. A woman at the desk lifted her eyes and smiled with one half of her mouth, not the half that reveals warmth. A young nurse in scrubs the color of robin's eggs walked past, pushing a cart that jingled with tiny cups. A man with white hair was asleep in an armchair by a lamp that flickered with a burnout bulb trying to live. Mark filled out forms. I signed where he pointed. My hands didn't tremble this time. I watched. When the administrator arrived, she had the efficient voice of someone who believes her job is sweeping marbles into jars. "Mrs. Carter, welcome," she said. "I'm Miss Diggs. We'll make the transition easy. Your son tells me you're spry. That's wonderful. We have a walking club and bingo on Thursdays." "My mother taught school for 38 years, Mark said. "She's used to routines." "I'm used to children," I said. Miss Diggs laughed politely. She did not write it down. A nurse named Claire took me to my room. Mark wheeled my suitcase. It was on the 3rd floor, down a hall where the carpet was brown with patterns invented to hide spills. My room had a window that did indeed show a slice of lake. It also showed the parking lot. The bedspread was the color of oatmeal. On the dresser sat a laminated sheet that listed meal times and recreational offerings, and the Wi-Fi password as if the internet might replace the smell of home. Claire set my suitcase on the chair and turned to me. She had a face that made you think of fresh bread. Warm, honest, a little freckled. "I'll come back in an hour to take your blood pressure and do the intake," she said. "Do you want water now?" "Yes," I said. And then, because I saw kindness and because kindness calls to confession, I added, "I'm not as spry as my son said, but I'm not made of paper mache either." She smiled with her whole mouth. "I can tell. If you need anything, push the call button. If no one comes, push again. If no one comes twice, tell me tomorrow and I'll make sure that doesn't happen again." I watched her leave. I put my clothes in the closet and set Walter's sweaters in the drawer that stuck a little until you persuaded it. I taped the little picture of him at Wrigley to the wall because a husband's grin is better than any art. Then I sat on the bed, laid my hand on the coverlet, and told myself, this was not a prison. It might be a classroom. Dinner that night was chicken that had given up too soon. Mashed potatoes that remembered real butter but did not reach for it. Green beans that had been taught manners by steam. I sat with a woman named Lila who wore lipstick brighter than her mood, and a gentleman named Mr. Alvarez who held himself like a man who had once held a tool for a living. "This place is fine," Lila said, and the word fine dragged its feet. "Except Wednesdays. The hair person comes Wednesdays and acts like we should tip for being insulted." "I'm new," I said. "I don't know which days are good yet." "Fridays are fish," Mr. Alvarez said. "Sometimes they forget it's Friday. I tell them. They say they know. I say then, why is it meatloaf?" I looked around the room and realized that when you live with strangers, you learn their faces first, their names second, and their dignity last if the place is not built right. I began to keep a notebook. I wrote down the way the night shift answered my call light in 3 minutes, not 9, when Claire was on. I wrote down the way Miss Diggs's laughter changed when a family member with a power suit came to complain. I wrote how often the bulbs flickered at the end of the hall. On my 4th day, my son arrived with flowers that smelled of trying too hard. He stood in the doorway and assessed my bedspread like it was a stock. "How's bingo?" he said. "I don't play, I watch," I said. "That's fine," he said, "as long as you're safe. Listen, the house will close Friday. You don't have to worry about a thing. The movers already cleared the basement. I donated your winter coats to Goodwill. It's almost summer." "I'll need coats again," I said. He waved his hand like seasons were adjustable. "We'll buy new. The buyer is a nice couple with a little girl. I told them you raised me there. The wife cried. It felt right." The house would not close Friday. Arthur had frozen what Walter instructed him to freeze. The buyer might cry again when he received news. I pressed my lips together. Mark took my silence for surrender. He sat down in my chair and crossed his leg over his knee. Grace and I are going to Lake Geneva this weekend, he said. A little celebration. She's been stressed with brand deals. I need a break too. Clients are acting weird. Everyone wants safe assets. No one wants to be bold anymore. I swallowed the thing I wanted to say about boldness and safety and the difference between them when they are muscle versus when they are theater. Take sunscreen, I said. Irish skin remembers. He grinned that boy grin, the one I would have given a kidney to keep, the one I wanted to take out of the pocket of his adulthood and iron. Then he left. That night, I made a note. When someone believes they are saving you, they will not watch you closely enough to see you saving yourself. Week 2, Claire found me in the lounge pretending to read a magazine from last August, and she sat without asking permission. You're not like the others, she said. I don't mean your mind. I mean I don't know the word. You look like you're storing things. I used to teach 3rd grade, I said. You learn to store every child's secret and the exact noise the heater makes at 2 p.m. She laughed. I've been here 3 years, she said. It's a good place. It's not good enough. How is it not good enough, I asked. The way I used to when a student said the rules weren't fair and I needed more than the cry to see where to fix the rule. Short staff at night sometimes, she said. We cover, but it means Mrs. Boone waits 10 minutes for a bathroom and then her son writes a review. The kitchen is better than most, worse than the menu. Miss Diggs cares about numbers more than faces. It's her job, but sometimes I want to shake budgets until a heart falls out. What keeps you here, I asked. People who say my name like it matters, Claire said, and her eyes surprised me by shining. And the lake. You can smell it from the elevator on windy days. On the 12th day of pretending, Arthur called my room and identified himself as a volunteer, his bureaucratic humor. He told me we had regained title on the house. The buyer had been decent about it, and the contract had an out because the seller's signatory lacked authority. He told me Mark had called the realtor and yelled. He told me to breathe. I'm breathing, I said. How much longer do I have to act like I don't own a thing in here? You never have to act like you don't own your name, he said. As for everything else, 2 more weeks. There's a board meeting next month. They'll think it's routine. It won't be. What about my son? I asked. He paused like a man who knows the truth and wishes it were softer. He opened a line of credit he thought he had the right to open. It bounced off the wall I set around the trust and crumpled. He tried to move funds from your small, checking into a brokerage that is called Bold Things. I crumpled that too. He's going to feel bruised. Let him. And if he shows up here and tries to manage me, tell him the coffee in the dining room tastes like a mistake and you would like better. See if he hears you. If he doesn't, write it down. I hung up and walked down to dinner. The coffee did taste like a mistake. The woman at my table said it always tasted like that after 4 because they let it sit. I wrote that down. On the 15th day, I found a note slipped under my door, folded twice with a line of red pen across the top. It said, if anyone treats you like furniture, tell me. I'm on Enoch shift tonight. C. In the margins, Claire had drawn a crooked heart that looked like my first attempt at chalk hearts on the playground blacktop in 1978. I folded the note and put it in my sweater pocket and felt armed. On the 20th day, my son came at night like a storm. He did not bring flowers. He did not kiss my forehead. He sat on the edge of my bed and talked too fast. The realtor says the deal fell apart because you never signed a deed, he said. Of course you didn't. I told her I had power of attorney. She says it doesn't matter. Apparently your old lawyer put the house in some kind of shell. Why would Dad do that? Why would you? He bit off the end of the sentence because he heard himself accuse. Anyway, it's complicated. The thing is, I need you to go to a notary with me. We'll clear it up. No, I said softly. Mom, he said, the syllables stretched like taffy. I need you to cooperate. Grace is freaking out. Our place in Wilmette was a stretch. I took the adjustable. Rates reset last month. I didn't think it would be this bad. And now my overhead is... He stopped. He had never told me about the adjustable. He had never told me about his overhead. He had told me I shouldn't worry. I'm not going to the notary, I said, and you need to leave now. Visiting hours are over. He stared. They are not. Visiting hours go to 8. They do for sons who don't shout, I said. He stood, opened his mouth, closed it, ran his hand through his hair like a man scraping his scalp for a solution. Then he left. The door closed softly, as if he knew anger echoes in hallways in ways shame does not. I sat on my bed and pressed my fingers hard where my pulse lived and breathed. Then I took out my notebook and wrote, "He is drowning and still asks for the umbrella I'm wearing." The evening nurse peeked in. It wasn't Claire. "You okay in here?" she asked. "Do we have chamomile tea?" I asked. "The coffee tastes like a mistake after 4, she grinned. "It always does." "Could we make it not do that?" I said. "I'll tell the kitchen," she said. "They think a pot is a pet. They let it sit and age like it's wine." On the 23rd day, Mr. Alvarez told the story of how he'd lost a finger at the machine shop. He held up his hand like a proof. "It wasn't the worst day," he said. "The worst day was when my boss told me to take fewer breaks because I looked old when I walked toward the bathroom. Sometimes the worst day is the one when someone tells you what your body is in a voice like they are reading an ad." On the 29th day, I watched a young CNA named Jonah tie Mrs. Boone's shoelaces with patient hands, while Miss Diggs scolded him at the desk for taking too long with non-essentials. Sometime between snack and chapel, I slipped into Miss Diggs's office and looked at the wall of metrics she'd built like a shrine. Numbers matter. I am not naive, but there are numbers that count and numbers that keep count. I wrote that down. On the 30th day, Arthur called and said, "Are you tired of pretending?" "Yes," I said. "Good," he said, "because I called a special board meeting and because your son is about to discover the word consequence. The bank that issued his line of credit would like to discuss signatures that do not belong to him. They will not call the police if you choose a different route. Choose carefully." "Bring him to the meeting," I said before I could be talked out of my own plan. Arthur was silent for 1 beat, then 2. "This is your violin," he said. "Hear you tuning it." The board met in a conference room at the management company's headquarters in Skokie, 10 minutes from my old house and a universe away. The table was oval and polished. The view was of a parking lot and a patch of sky. Men and women I had never met gathered with laptops and water bottles that said things like, "Hydrate," as if hydration could fix the kind of thirst they had. They expected routine. Arthur had told them review and governance. He had not told them the owner of their reality would walk in like a woman faint enough to be dismissed and strong enough to hold her chin like a weapon. I wore Walter's blue sweater, the one he wore to our 50th anniversary dinner, and my flats that don't apologize for my bunion. Claire sat in the back with a notebook because I asked her to. She had taken the morning off with a smile that looked like someone had handed her a key. Arthur opened the meeting with his law voice. Then he turned to me as if I were the weather and said, "Mrs. Carter." "I'm Evelyn," I said, and watched the room decide whether to call me that. Somebody cleared his throat. Somebody clicked a pen. Somebody shifted in a chair like a teenager at an assembly. "I'm sorry for the surprise," I said. "My husband built this and then died without asking my permission. I forgave him because I loved him, and because I understand why he did things the way he did. I understand hypervigilance disguised as secrecy. I also understand how places like Maple Ridge can be good on paper and lazy in small ways that turn people into problems instead of neighbors." A woman in a jacket that screamed authority raised her eyebrow. "And you are?" "The successor trustee of Silver Haven," Arthur said, "which controls this enterprise." The room did a collective version of inhaling. It sounded like the first note of a wrong hymn. I told them what I'd seen. The way Jonah's hands tied shoelaces like prayer. The way coffee turned bitter after 4 because nobody loved it enough to throw it out. The way bulbs flickered at the end of the 3rd-floor hall like despair. The way Miss Diggs measured staff by minutes and residents by compliance. The way Claire made dignity happen by calling people by the name their mothers used. I told them about Mr. Alvarez and his finger and the bathroom rule. I told them about the man asleep by the lamp and the lamp trying to live. "This is not an indictment," I said. "This is a curriculum. We're going to change 10 small things and then 10 big things and then measure the right numbers. We are going to pay night staff like they are buying people dignity with their time, because they are. We are going to hire a second hair person. So Wednesday is not a ritual of insult. We are going to buy coffee that forgives us and make it fresh after 4. We are going to replace every bulb down every hallway. We are going to fire Miss Diggs." Miss Diggs made a sound as if someone had spilled gravy. The woman with authority jacket leaned forward. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that this place deserves a leader who measures hours in faces, not charts," I said. Arthur slid a folder toward the jacket woman like a dealer slides a card. "Documented performance and resident family complaints," he said mildly, "and a clause in the management agreement gives the trustee latitude." A man at the other end of the table attempted to look brave. "With respect, Mrs. Carter, Evelyn, this is unusual governance." "Unusual governance," I said, "is how ordinary people get a fair shake when the usual kind fails them. We'll keep the parts that work. We'll replace the parts that teach people to hurry with hearts." Arthur's phone buzzed on the table, and he looked at the screen in the way a man looks when he's expecting a doctor's call. "Mr. Carter is in the lobby," he said, and his eyes met mine. "He's here." "Send him in," I said. My son entered with his tie slightly askew, as if he had rushed, and his mouth set as if he had practiced scolding in the car. He took in the room the way a person scans for exits and allies. His eyes found me. They softened 1 second, then tightened. He didn't come to kiss my forehead. "Mom," he said cautiously, "what are you doing here?" "I'm at a meeting," I said. "What are you doing here?" "Arthur called and said there were documents I needed to sign," he said. He flicked his gaze to Arthur. "Important ones." "There are," Arthur said. "Have a seat." Mark sat on the edge of a chair, the edges of him taut. Arthur slid 2 packets in front of him. The first was a rescission of any claim he thought he had to property that belonged to the trust or to me. The second was an agreement to repay funds he had attempted to move improperly, plus a letter of apology to a bank that had been kind enough to be patient of tea because I asked them to. "What is this?" he asked, his eyes reading and his hands beginning to shake. "This is the price of not calling the police," Arthur said, and his voice was as soft as an old blanket that still covers. "Your mother asked me to give you a door instead of a wall. I advise you to walk through it." Mark looked at me as if our entire kitchen table history were stacked between us. Anger rose in his face and then slid in shame. "You froze the accounts," he said. You made me look like a fool. The realtor said—" "I am not interested in how you look," I said. "I am interested in who you are. You took things that weren't yours and you patted it with concern. You told me you did this because you love me." Love uses its inside voice. His eyes shimmered and then blinked the shimmer away as if tears would cost more than money. "You're humiliating me," he whispered. "I am saving you," I said. "In front of witnesses so you might believe me. You put me in Maple Ridge. You told me you were doing me a favor. You didn't know I own the place? I have watched the way you want to be a good man and how you slide when a number promises you sleep. I have loved you every day of your life, and I am not done." He swallowed. The room around us went silent with the kind of silence that isn't empty. It held everything it listened to. "Sign," Arthur said quietly. Mark signed. His handwriting wobbled. He put the pen down like it had weight. I took a breath. "There is more," I said, and his head lifted as if he feared an executioner and hoped for a stay. "You will come to Maple Ridge every Thursday for the next 12 weeks, I said. You will help Jonah with shoelaces, and you will pour coffee at 4, and you will replace bulbs on the 3rd floor. You will learn the names of everyone in the dining room, and you will say them like you are not reading an ad. You will do it quietly. You will not post about it. If after 12 weeks you still want to be a man who runs away from numbers by playing with bigger ones, I won't stop you. If you try to play games with any bank until then, I will stop you. You're making me do penance in your... He stopped, and the truth hovered between us like a small, patient bird. "I can't," he said, but it sounded like a question. "You can," I said. "You've asked 19 times in your life for me to make you do something you couldn't make yourself do. Learn to say no to the easy thing when the easy thing steals someone else's light." Grace was not at the meeting. Grace would not like this version of Mark. She liked him best, lit by money's approval. But I did not say her name. I gave my son the privacy of his own bad choices. Arthur closed his binder like a man closing a chapter. The board shifted in their seats under the weight of the reality they'd bought into. I stood. "Thank you," I said. "We'll reconvene next week to discuss budgets that include dignity." Outside, in the kind spring air, Mark followed me to the sidewalk. "You should have told me," he said, his voice tight. His eyes turned toward a sky that looked like the back of a robin's egg. "You should have asked me, not the papers," I said. "You brought me flags and grief and your voice that makes bad things sound like gifts, and you told me to sign." "I did. That was my mistake. This is my correction." He was quiet. Then, like a boy, he said, "Are you mad?" "I'm tired and I am steady," I said. "Those are more useful than mad." He walked me to Arthur's car and opened the door as if he remembered his father's hands. He closed it gently. I did not kiss his forehead. That night in my room, I unfolded Claire's note and put it under my pillow like a talisman. The next morning, the coffee after 4 tasted like someone had taught it to forgive. The 6 weeks that followed were a curriculum. Like I promised, we replaced bulbs. We added a second CNA on the night shift and a bonus for any night that ended with fewer than 2 unanswered call lights over 5 minutes. We hired a second hairdresser who listened. We put a pot of herbs by the dining room window and let residents pick basil with their fingers for Wednesday's pasta. We trained Miss Diggs's replacement by asking her to eat lunch with new residents for 7 days in a row and tell us something about each that wasn't in a chart. We gave Claire a small raise and a big title. We told Jonah to take his time with shoelaces. Thursday afternoons, my son showed up, rang the bell at the front, signed the visitor log like any other person, and walked upstairs to replace bulbs and pour coffee at 4. The first week, his hands shook so badly he splashed on the tray. The second week, he learned to carry a stack of cups and look people in the eye. The third week, he sat with Mr. Alvarez and asked the right questions about the finger and the bathroom rules. The fourth week, he brought chamomile because he learned Mrs. Boone sleeps easier when someone brews it in a real kettle. I watched him from a distance the way teachers watch and pretend they're not looking. I saw him smile without selling. I saw him stand in a doorway and hold the door without thinking about what it meant. I saw him check his phone and then put it away with a flash of shame because he caught himself measuring a person's face against a screen. The 6th week, Grace came to Maple Ridge with lips red as a news anchor and a scarf that looked like influence. She stood in the doorway of my room and looked around like a real estate agent staging a thought. "Is this what's happening now?" she said. "Is this the brand?" "This is my life," I said. "You are welcome to sit. There's no filming." She laughed. "He's changing," she said, and the accusation hid under the compliment like a small snake. "He didn't come to my networking dinner last Thursday because he was here replacing light bulbs for strangers." "I'm a stranger until someone listens to me say my name and says it back," I said. "Light makes it easier to see people while you learn their names." She rolled her eyes. "I liked him better before," she said. "He used to take me to dinners that cost a mortgage. Now he wants to be home on Thursdays making tea. It's cute. It won't last." "Some things don't last," I said. "Some things do because they're tired of acting like they don't want to." Grace's smile was beautiful and cold. "I need a man who looks like a win," she said, and left the room with the perfume of things that dissolve. That night, Mark knocked on my door without his wife and sat on my chair like a man whose limbs had remembered their weight. "She says I'm boring," he said, tone half joke, half ache. "You are becoming a man," I said. "It often looks boring to people who need fireworks to see anything." He looked down at his hands. "I changed a light bulb today and thought about how Dad used to change the porch bulbs on the 1st of every month, like it was a holiday. I never understood why it mattered until I watched Mrs. Boone's face when the lights stopped flickering and she said she didn't feel like she was in a movie about ghosts. Your father liked the 1st of the month," I said. "It made him feel like life had fresh paper." Mark smiled, small and real. "I'm sorry," he said then, quietly. "I'm sorry I took your pen." "I gave it to you," I said. "We both made a mess. We're both holding the rag." He nodded. "Arthur says I need to write a letter to the bank. He says I need to sit with him while he reads it out loud like I'm a child." "You are my child," I said. And he laughed through his nose in the way he did when he was 8 and caught with a frog in his pocket during church. On the 9th of Thursday, he replaced bulbs before Claire could ask and then sat with Lila while she put on lipstick. She handed him the tube and told him to roll it up 3 clicks exactly, because 2 was stingy and 4 was a mess. He obeyed. He did not tell her she was beautiful in a way that made beauty a charity. He told her he liked the color because it looked like the raspberries his grandmother used to grow in a cement tub behind their garage. Lila laughed like a girl and patted his hand as if she'd found something she'd lost behind the couch. The 12th Thursday, he came in late and pale. He found me in the lounge and sat without touching his phone. "They fired me," he said. "The firm, compliance. I should have told them about the accounts I tried to move. I should have told them everything. I was trying to fix it before anyone noticed. I was trying to be the guy who arrives with a bow on a problem. It turns out the bow was a cord. I waited." Quiet is also a way of loving your child. He shook his head. "I'm not asking you for money," he said quickly, and I almost laughed because he had learned to say the sentence like a coin with both sides engraved. "I'll figure it out. I can't tell what kind of man I am if I'm not the kind who says things like assets under management." I hear my own voice, and it sounds borrowed. "You're a man who can learn names and pour coffee and replace bulbs and write letters that make bankers forgive you," I said. "You're a man who can stop when a woman says stop. You're a man who can say I was wrong and not collapse. That's a good floor." He nodded like a man nods when he is not convinced yet, but wants to be. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked. "Stay," I said. "Finish 12 Thursdays. Then ask Claire what help she needs. Then go find work that uses your brain and your hands. Numbers aren't the only way to count." He blew out a breath that sounded like surrender, and salvation got tangled. "Okay," he said. In late August, I moved out of Maple Ridge without ceremony. I hugged Claire like a daughter, and Mr. Alvarez like a brother, and Lila like a friend who taught me a better lipstick brand. I went home. The house didn't look like it had been touched. The realtor had been decent indeed, the buyer startled, but sane. The porch bulbs had been changed on the 1st of the month by a man Arthur hired under strict instruction to water the geraniums and not touch the spice rack. My bedroom smelled like cedar and laundry soap. I lay down on my bed and told Walter the whole curriculum. I told him I had learned to pretend to be weak, and then remembered I did not have to pretend because grief had already taught me how to be small and big at once. I told him our son was learning. I told him I was tired and steady. I slept in my own sheets. When I woke, the L rattled like a hymn. In September, we announced the Silver Haven Foundation because the name was already written on the trust and because I wanted something that sounded like shelter. The board included Arthur and a nurse, and a man from the West Side who had organized a tenants' union in 1981, and Lila because people who know lipstick know dignity. We set 3 goals that fit on 1 page: dignify night work, invite families to be useful, and build a fund for residents who needed help with things. Insurance calls non-essential, and I call life. We replaced the brown carpet at Maple Ridge with a pattern that looked like a prairie if you stared. We painted the dining room a color that was not hospital nor the inside of a pearl. We bought chamomile and coffee that forgave, and a machine that turned basil into pesto on Wednesdays. We fixed the schedule so Jonah did not have to choose between shoelaces and charts. We hired a hairdresser who came Fridays and talked to people like she charged for joy, not for curls. Mark started working for the foundation. He made budgets that had faces in the margins. He created a program that paired business school volunteers with facilities to figure out how to trim waste without trimming dignity. He showed up on time with his phone off. He did not wear a tie. He still checked the Cubs score on his breaks. I told him that was allowed. Grace moved to Los Angeles with a man who looked like Wins on Instagram. She sent a card with no return address that said, "Take care of him," in letters that looked like a caption. I threw it away without malice and with relief. The winter after I came home, the lake froze so hard even the wind sounded like glass. I wore Walter's sweaters like armor and boiled soup like a woman who knows how to love with carrots. Mark came over on Sundays to shovel the walk and learn how to make biscuits that stand up tall. He took his shoes off at the door without being asked. Sometimes he frowned at the bills like they were a puzzle he could solve if only the corners would behave. He did not ask me for money. I offered quietly once. He said no. He meant it. The trust had money enough for both of us until my last day, but giving my son the kind of money that erases curriculum would be like giving a baby coffee. I chose to keep him sleepy with humility a little longer. One Thursday in March, Claire called and told me something that made me sit on the kitchen floor with the phone pressed to my ear like a teenager again. "We had a power outage on the 3rd floor," she said breathlessly, "and the emergency lights failed to switch. We don't know why yet. It was 10 minutes of dark. Everyone was safe. Jonah had a flashlight like a saint, but your son was here replacing bulbs because he'd fallen behind on the schedule thanks to a stomach bug, and Evelyn, I swear to God, he started singing." "Singing," I said, my heart doing a ridiculous thing with its own drum. "He sang 'You Are My Sunshine' loud and stupid and off-key," she said, laughing and crying together in the way nurses can cry because they don't bottle things for later. And people laughed, and the dark felt like something we could boss around. He kept changing the words. He sang, "You are my shoelace," to Mrs. Boone, and "You are my coffee," to Lila, and "You are my light bulb," to Jonah. And I think he saved us from panic. He looked at me after and said, "My mom used to make my dad change the porch light on the 1st of the month because she said darkness is a thief if you let it." I told him that sounded like you. "It does," I said. "Tell him I said good job. Don't make it a big deal. He's like a skittish horse. Praise will make him bolt." She laughed. "You always know the right words." "I had a good teacher," I said, meaning life and Walter and my own stubborn heart that kept taking notes. In June, we held a picnic on the lawn behind Maple Ridge. Families came with potato salad and lawn chairs that sink on soft ground. The foundation rented a tent and a speaker, and a man who played the old songs on a guitar that had been repaired 3 times in places where fingers had loved it too much. I wore a dress with small blue flowers because Walter always said it made me look like a summer day from a childhood memory. Mr. Alvarez danced with a woman in pink who had a laugh that invited the neighbors. Lila kissed everyone on the mouth who consented, and somehow no one minded because her lipstick had become a community event. Jonah pushed a grill like a chariot. Claire ran around refilling water and hugging people with the practiced efficiency of a person who built a cathedral out of paper cups. Mark stood behind the lemonade table and poured without looking at his phone. Midway through the afternoon, he came to me and said, "Do you remember when Dad bought that broken bench at the church sale and spent all weekend making it stronger than anything in our yard?" "I remember the splinters," I said. He said, "Sometimes you have to take a thing apart until you can't recognize it, and then put it back together with your hands more than your head," Mark said. He looked at the tent, the grill, the people, the lake pretending to be sturdy in the distance. I thought being a man was getting the bench first. It might be learning how to use a sander. "Or learning when to stop," I said. He laughed. "I rode to the bank," he said, eyes steady. "I told them everything. I apologized. They accepted. They said they appreciated the detail." He paused. "I meant it. I know you did." He looked at me then in that way that makes time collapse and unfold. "I'm sorry," he said again. Not because he thought repetition was theater, but because he understood that some words become truer the more you let them touch air. "I forgive you," I said again, because forgiveness also becomes truer with repetition. At dusk, Arthur came with a folding chair he refused to let anyone carry for him, and a smile that looked like mercy. He sat beside me and watched laughter be the kind of music that doesn't need a stage. "You did what he asked," he said. "I did what I needed," I said. "He would be proud," Arthur said. "He would be insufferable," I said. And we both laughed because grief makes room for jokes when it is healing properly. The first real summer storm of July came with honesty. Sideways rain, thunder like furniture, lightning you could feel in your front teeth. The power went out on our block, and I lit the candles I keep in the kitchen drawer next to the Tupperware lids. I sat on the living room rug and listened to the house remember being older than electricity. I talked to Walter about benches and bulls and buzzwords and budget lines that learned how to behave, and about our son, who finally had a face in his own mirror that he did not have to sell to anyone. The storm passed, the city exhaled, the porch light came back on by itself, steady and unashamed. I walked outside in my slippers and stood under the glow like a woman who had learned how to plant bulbs, even when the fall felt like an ending. In August, I turned 69. Mark and Claire conspired to throw me a small party at Maple Ridge because they wanted me to blow out candles in a place where people see age as data and habit. Lila made a cake the color of the inside of a peach. Mr. Alvarez brought a blue ribbon he'd saved since 1972 when his daughter won a sack race and forgot to take the ribbon home. Jonah decorated with streamers that looked like someone whispered to them and they were too polite to refuse. They gave me gifts. A photo of the third-floor hallway lit up like a runway. A bag of coffee that promised forgiveness after 4. A pair of socks with basil leaves printed on them. Mark gave me a small frame with our front steps inside, a picture he took the day he thought he was driving me to a permanent place, and I let him think it. My smile in the picture looks like a woman who knows she owns the road even when someone else holds the map. "Make a wish," Claire said, holding the cake as if it were a baby she judged strong enough to see the world. I closed my eyes and wished that someone reading this someday would understand that love is not soft when it matters. It is a spine and sometimes a hammer and often a violin that plays through thunder until you can hear the song you grew up humming. I wish that my son would marry dignity if he married anything at all. I wish that when my time came, it would be at home or in a room where a nurse named Claire would hold my hand and tell me the coffee would be fresh in heaven. I blew out the candles. Everyone shouted and clapped like I had conquered Everest instead of air. It felt like both. In October, a new resident moved into Maple Ridge on a Monday that smelled like leaves and dinner. She was my age, from the South Side, a librarian who could beat anyone at crossword puzzles and humility. She cried the first night because her daughter had brought forms with flags. Claire sat on the bed and said, "You don't have to pretend here. Not anymore." The woman asked for tea. Claire brewed chamomile in an actual kettle and poured it into a cup that wasn't plastic. She said the coffee at 4 was no longer a mistake. The woman laughed through her nose and said, "My mother used to say mistakes don't have to be permanent if you set a timer." I went to visit the woman the next day and brought basil from the pot in the dining room. We talked about the smell of old books and small boys who grow up and get lost and find their way home because their mothers learned how to hide maps in casseroles. She said, "This place feels like someone is watching with their heart." I said, "Someone is." The winter I turned 70, the Cubs lost beautifully and then won the next day like Hope remembered. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that did not forgive at 4 because I'd learned to drink tea in the afternoons instead. And I wrote a letter to the version of me who opened the wheat-colored envelope and felt mad at a man who asked her to pretend. "Dear Evelyn," I wrote, "you were not wrong to be angry. You were not wrong to obey. Sometimes pretending is protection. Sometimes it is a lesson. You did not make a prison. You made a school. Look at your students. Your son with the lemonade and the singing, your nurse with the basil, your administrator who knows lipstick is a sacrament, your man who lost a finger and found a purpose, counting bathroom breaks as human rights. You did this by being tired and steady." I sealed the letter and put it in the cedar box. Grief sat on the chair across from me like a person who has stopped insisting on a larger seat. "We did a good job," I told it. It nodded. "It will always be there when I make soup and when the porch light goes out, because bulbs are mortal too. I have learned not to hate what ends. I have learned to change the bulb on the 1st of the month." Early the next spring, a young man in a suit came to Maple Ridge asking to speak to the owner because he wanted to pitch a cost-saving program that would streamline end-of-life care. He used words like optimize and allocate. Miss Diggs would have scheduled him. The new administrator sent him to me. I met him in the lobby and listened for 5 minutes. Then I said, "What you call end-of-life care, I call continuing life care. The end is not a cliff. It's a porch with a view." He laughed because he thought I was cute. I told him to leave because I am sometimes not cute. Later, I put a note on the bulletin board that said, "Porch light replacement on Friday. Bring your grandchild to help if they are tall enough to reach. Dignity is a group project." Mark showed up with a step stool and a boy from neighborhood baseball whose mother worked Saturdays and needed a break. They took turns on the ladder. They laughed like men who have learned that light is a thing. You don't just flip. It is a thing you tend. I am 71 now. You want a story where I get revenge, where my son loses everything, where I become a queen who makes bankers bow. I will not give you that story. I will give you the one where a woman learns to pretend without lying to herself, where a son learns that Thursday afternoons can make a man out of a boy louder than any dollar amount can, where a chain of buildings becomes a chain of hands passing cups of tea, where coffee forgives us at 4, and light bulbs get replaced before they flicker long enough to scare anyone's grandmother. I will give you a story where I sit on my front steps with a porch light that works and thank a man who taught me to love through clauses and keys and trust. Sometimes I walk down to the lake in the late afternoon when the sun turns the water into a friend who can't stop talking about what it saw today. I sit on a bench that Walter once repaired after a church sale and listen to gulls argue and children invent games with sticks. My knees ache the way knees do, honestly. I am no more spry than the day Mark told me I was. I pass my hand over the rough wood and feel the places where Walter's hands made it stronger. A woman sits next to me, a stranger at first. She tells me her son wants to sell her house. She tells me he used sticky flags. She tells me she is tired and ashamed of being mad and sad at the same time. I tell her to keep breathing. I tell her to find a lawyer who doesn't kiss rings. I tell her to pretend just long enough to see what she needs to fix. I tell her that love is not soft when it matters. I tell her to buy good coffee and a box of chamomile and a bag of light bulbs. I tell her, when my son sent me to a nursing home, he had no idea who really owned it. I didn't either until I opened the letter. You might own more than you think. She laughs through her nose like a third grader trying not to be noticed and says, I hope so. I say, you will. And even if you don't own property, you own your name. Say it like you do. She looks out at the lake. The sun lowers itself with no hurry, unafraid of what the dark might do because it knows the porch light we will turn on. She says her name out loud. It sounds like a truth she paid for and now gets to keep. On my way home, I stop by Maple Ridge because Claire promised me basil and a piece of Lila's lemon cake. In the lobby, a new sign hangs where a plaque used to list a management company that never visited. The sign says, Welcome Home. Below that, in smaller letters, Silver Haven Foundation, where dignity lives. Someone added a handwritten note with a blue marker that smells like first day of school. Coffee is fresh after 4. Tell us if it isn't, we're learning. I smile because learning is my favorite religion. I walk upstairs to the 3rd floor. The lights do not flicker. I pass the lamp where the man with white hair used to sleep. A woman naps there now with a book open on her lap. The book is a mystery. That seems right. In my room, the one that isn't mine anymore but will always carry my ghost, I open the drawer that used to stick and find it slides clean. I write a note and leave it like a secret future resident might find, just when she needs it most. Dear you, if someone tells you they are saving you with a form and a smile, ask for coffee after 4. If it's fresh, you'll be okay. If it isn't, tell Claire. She'll fix the coffee and the world in that order. If your son shows up with flags and grief, hug him, then take his pen until he learns to use it without hurting anyone. Change the porch light on the 1st of every month. Love is a hammer and a violin. You can sing loud and off-key in the dark. You will not be alone. Evelyn. I fold the paper, slide it under the cedar liner, and close the drawer with a small, satisfied push. On my way out, I see my son in the hallway. He's carrying a box of bulbs on his shoulder like a man who knows how to lift what needs lifting. He sees me. He grins the grin I would have carried my whole life if I could have. He kisses my forehead. He smells faintly of dust and basil and a new kind of future. "Mom," he says, "do you need anything?" "No," I say honestly. "I have everything I need." He nods, happy with the assignment I just gave him. None. And then makes his way down the hall as a light goes out in room 312. He opens the door without knocking because the woman inside once told him, "Don't knock, I'm deaf as a fence post and my hearing aids are liars." He changes the bulb while she complains about the weather and the government and the way her daughter never learned to make pot roast. He tells her about Jonah's new baby and Lila's lipstick and Claire's basil. He does not mention budgets or risk or loss. He mentions only names. I go home through the neighborhood that watched me be 20 and then 40 and then a widow and then whatever this is. I climb my front steps. The porch light glows faithful. On the table by the door sits the cedar box where I keep letters that changed my life. I run my hand over the lid. I whisper thank you. He doesn't answer, not with words. He answers with the porch light and a memory of coffee and the way his lips used to feel on my forehead in the morning, before any of this, when all of this was just a vague cloud of someday. I touch my forehead with my own hand like a woman giving herself a blessing she has earned. When you ask me what the moral is, I will not say anything about money. Money is a tool, and tools do not teach. I will say this. Choose to be tired and steady instead of angry and loud. Replace the bulb before it scares someone. Brew something kind at 4. Memorize names. Pretend only long enough to see what you need to fix. Then fix it. Then sit down, pour tea, and let your body rest in the old, honest chair by the window that faces the world you helped build. Tomorrow is the 1st of the month. I'll climb the step stool Mark insists on holding steady and change the porch light. He'll be beneath me like a man who understands his job, finally, is to support, not to decide. I'll tease him about being tall enough to do it himself, and he'll say, "You taught me to share the work." We'll laugh, and the neighbors walking their dogs will nod because they've learned our rhythm. I will twist the old bulb out, twist the new one in, and watch the glow arrive. Slow, then steady, then bright enough to tell the dark it's not the boss of us. I will go inside, put the kettle on, and wait for 4 o'clock with joy.